I'm Sarah, 28 years old, and I never imagined that our family reunion would become the stage for my biggest professional vindication. Standing in my cousin's backyard in suburban Phoenix, watching my younger brother Marcus laugh with our relatives about my embarrassing little job, I had no idea that in 20 minutes everything would change. The man sipping lemonade by the dessert table, the one Marcus had been trying to impress all afternoon by name-dropping his fancy consulting firm, was about to introduce himself as the CEO of my biggest client. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the Williams household meant understanding your place in the family hierarchy from day one. I was the practical daughter, the one who colored inside the lines and finished her vegetables without being asked. Marcus, 3 years younger, was the golden child with the magnetic personality and the ability to charm his way out of any situation. Our parents never said it outright, but their actions painted a clear picture of who they believed would go furthest in life. When I was 12, I started a small lawn care business in our neighborhood in Tucson. I saved every penny I earned, reinvesting in better equipment and expanding to include weeding and basic landscaping. My parents praised my work ethic, but always with a qualifier. "Sarah's always been so responsible," Mom would tell her friends, "but she needs to think bigger than manual labor." Meanwhile, when Marcus started a lemonade stand that lasted exactly 3 days before he got bored, Dad called him a natural entrepreneur and bought him a business book collection. High school solidified these roles even further. While I maintained a solid 3.8 GPA and worked weekends at a local garden center, Marcus coasted on his charisma and natural test-taking ability. He pulled B's and C's without studying, spent his free time gaming with friends, and somehow convinced our parents that his people skills were more valuable than my academic consistency. When college acceptance letters arrived, I received a partial scholarship to Arizona State for Business Administration. Marcus got into the same school with lower grades, but somehow spun it as proof of his hidden potential. "Your brother just needed to find his motivation," Mom explained when I questioned why his tuition was fully covered while I worked 25 hours a week at the campus bookstore to make ends meet. "You've always been self-sufficient. Marcus needs more guidance to reach his potential." College became a study in contrasts that would define our relationship for years to come. I threw myself into my studies, joining the entrepreneurship club and interning at a small marketing firm during summers. I lived in the cheapest dorm available, ate ramen more nights than I care to remember, and graduated with minimal debt and a job offer from a local advertising agency. Marcus changed majors 3 times, from business to communications to sociology, finally settling on marketing when he realized it was the path of least resistance. He lived in the newest residence hall, had a meal plan that covered all his food needs, and graduated with a degree that our parents celebrated as if he'd cured cancer. The professional divide between us became apparent immediately after graduation. I started as a junior account coordinator at Henderson & Associates, a mid-sized firm that specialized in helping local businesses develop their marketing strategies. The work was demanding but rewarding. I loved the puzzle of understanding what made each client unique and crafting campaigns that actually moved the needle for their bottom line. My first year, I helped a struggling family restaurant increase their revenue by 40% through targeted social media campaigns and community engagement strategies. Marcus, meanwhile, leveraged his college networking skills into a position at Morrison Strategic Consulting, a large firm with impressive offices and even more impressive client names. The starting salary was nearly double mine, and the prestige factor was undeniable. At family gatherings, Marcus would casually mention working with Fortune 500 companies and flying to client meetings in major cities. Our parents hung on every word, asking detailed questions about his projects and celebrating each minor promotion as if he'd been elected to public office. My work rarely got the same attention. When I excitedly shared news about landing a significant client or winning an industry award for a campaign I'd developed, the conversation would quickly shift to Marcus and his latest corporate adventure. "That's wonderful, honey," Mom would say with a distracted smile before turning to Marcus. "Tell us more about that project in Seattle. It sounds so exciting." The pattern persisted as we both established ourselves professionally. Marcus thrived in the corporate environment, where his natural charm and ability to manage up made him popular with senior leadership. He was promoted rapidly, not always because of his work quality, but because he knew how to position himself as indispensable. His social media was filled with photos from company retreats, team building events, and client dinners at expensive restaurants. To anyone watching from the outside, Marcus Williams was the definition of young professional success. My path was quieter but more substantial. After 3 years at Henderson and Associates, I made the terrifying decision to start my own consulting practice. Williams Marketing Solutions began in a spare bedroom of my apartment, with me as the sole employee and a client list of exactly 0. I specialized in helping small to medium-sized businesses develop comprehensive marketing strategies that went beyond just advertising to encompass brand positioning, customer experience, and growth planning. The first year was brutal. I worked 18-hour days, took on projects that barely covered my expenses, and questioned my decision daily. There were nights I fell asleep at my laptop, mornings I survived on nothing but coffee and determination, and weeks where my biggest victory was simply keeping the lights on. My parents watched my struggles with a mixture of concern and barely concealed disappointment. "Maybe you should consider going back to a stable job," Dad suggested during one particularly difficult stretch when I was surviving on client advances and prayer. "Marcus says his company might have some entry-level positions available. It wouldn't be a step backward, just a more secure foundation." The suggestion that I should work for my younger brother, that my entrepreneurial journey was somehow less valid than his corporate ladder climbing, stung more than I let on. But I channeled that hurt into fuel for my business. I refined my services, improved my processes, and slowly began to build a reputation for delivering results that mattered. By my second year, something shifted. The referrals started coming more frequently. Clients began staying longer and investing more in comprehensive strategies rather than one-off projects. I hired my first employee, a brilliant recent graduate named Jessica, who shared my passion for data-driven marketing solutions. By year 3, I had a team of 4 and had outgrown my apartment office for a small but professional space downtown. What my family didn't understand was that my client roster was evolving beyond the small local businesses they imagined. While Marcus was creating PowerPoint presentations for executives he'd never meet, I was sitting in boardrooms with CEOs and founders, developing strategies that directly impacted company growth and market positioning. My work wasn't just theoretical, it was producing measurable results that my clients could point to in their quarterly reports. One of my most significant wins came in my 4th year of business, when I landed a contract with Phoenix Regional Medical Center. They were struggling with community perception issues after a series of negative news stories and needed help rebuilding their brand reputation while also increasing patient volume. The project required everything from crisis communications to community outreach strategy, from digital presence optimization to internal culture development. The medical center engagement lasted 8 months and became a case study in comprehensive reputation management. We increased positive community sentiment by 65%, grew patient satisfaction scores to their highest levels in 5 years, and helped them secure a major expansion grant that required demonstrated community support. The success led to referrals to other healthcare systems, and suddenly I was being invited to speak at industry conferences about integrated marketing approaches for complex organizations. Despite these wins, family gatherings still felt like performances where I was perpetually the opening act for Marcus's main event. He had been promoted to senior consultant and was working on what he described as enterprise-level transformational initiatives. The language was impressive, even if I suspected the reality was more mundane. But our parents ate it up, asking questions about his corporate culture and expressing pride in his professional advancement. My business growth, meanwhile, was met with polite interest but little genuine enthusiasm. When I mentioned hiring new employees or signing significant contracts, the response was typically something like, "That's great, sweetheart. Small business ownership is so brave." The word small always stung, carrying an implicit judgment that what I was building was somehow lesser than Marcus's corporate achievements. The divide became even more pronounced when Marcus started dating Jennifer, a fellow consultant he'd met at a company training event. Jennifer fit perfectly into the world our parents had always imagined for their children, polished, articulate, with an MBA from a prestigious university, and a clear trajectory toward executive leadership. She and Marcus made a striking couple at family events, both dressed in expensive business casual attire, speaking fluently about market trends and industry disruption. I was genuinely happy for Marcus and liked Jennifer as a person, but their relationship highlighted everything our parents found lacking in my own choices. My last serious relationship had ended 2 years earlier, partly because building a business left little time for romance, but mostly because I hadn't met anyone who understood the drive that consumed most of my waking hours. At family dinners, I'd watch Jennifer and Marcus discuss their career plans with the kind of synchronized ambition that made our parents beam with pride. "You should find someone like Jennifer," Mom suggested during one particularly awkward holiday meal. "Professional, stable, someone who could be a real partner in building a life together." The implication that my business building phase was somehow a detour from real adult life was clear, even if unspoken. What made these conversations particularly frustrating was how little my family actually understood about either Marcus's work or mine. They saw his corporate title and impressive office building and assumed success. They saw my small team and flexible work arrangements and assumed I was playing house with a hobby business. The reality was more complex than either perception, but perception had become our family's version of reality. Marcus, to his credit, never openly disparaged my work during these years. He seemed genuinely proud of my entrepreneurial spirit, even if he didn't fully understand what I did or why I'd chosen such an uncertain path. When people asked about his sister at work events, he'd describe me as the entrepreneur in the family, with what sounded like affection rather than condescension. It was our parents who consistently framed our choices in competitive terms, as if my success somehow diminished his or vice versa. The truth was that we were both good at what we did, but in completely different ways. Marcus excelled at managing relationships within large organizational structures, understanding corporate politics, and delivering what clients expected within established frameworks. I thrived on solving unique problems, building something from nothing, and creating customized solutions that didn't exist before clients knew they needed them. Our skills were complementary rather than competitive, but our family system seemed incapable of celebrating both paths simultaneously. This dynamic reached a new level of awkwardness when Marcus was promoted to principal consultant in his 5th year at Morrison Strategic. The promotion came with a significant salary increase, equity in the company, and the kind of title that impressed people at cocktail parties. Our parents threw him a celebration dinner at their favorite restaurant, inviting extended family to commemorate what Dad called a major milestone in Marcus's promising career. I was genuinely happy for my brother and attended the dinner with enthusiasm, bringing a thoughtful gift and preparing to celebrate his achievement. But the evening quickly became a subtle critique of my own choices, with multiple relatives asking when I planned to get serious about my career or whether I'd considered working for a real company like Marcus. The questions were meant kindly, but they revealed how little understanding existed about what I'd actually built or accomplished. That same month, I signed the largest contract in my company's history, a comprehensive brand development and market positioning project with a tech startup that had just secured Series A funding. The project would span 12 months, require me to hire 3 additional team members, and position my company for expansion into new markets. It represented everything I'd worked toward since starting the business, validation that my approach and expertise could compete at the highest levels. When I shared the news at the next family dinner, the response was enthusiastic but brief. "That's wonderful, honey," Mom said, giving me a quick hug before turning to Marcus. "Tell us about your new office space."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Marcus was just describing the view from the 32nd floor. The moment crystallized everything I felt about our family dynamics. My biggest professional victory was a footnote to Marcus's office renovation. As I drove home that night, I realized that part of the frustration wasn't just about recognition or validation. It was about being truly seen and understood by the people who should know me best. My parents looked at Marcus and saw a clear, linear success story they could easily explain to their friends. They looked at me and saw a daughter who had taken an unnecessarily difficult path to achieve something they couldn't quite categorize or quantify. The irony was that my work had become increasingly high-profile within my industry, even if my family didn't recognize it. I'd been featured in several business publications, invited to serve on nonprofit boards, and asked to mentor other entrepreneurs through a state-sponsored program. My client list included companies that, while not household names, were significant players in their respective markets with revenues that dwarfed many of the corporations Marcus consulted for. But success in entrepreneurship looks different from success in corporate America, and my family had never learned to recognize the markers. They saw Marcus's business cards and company car and understood prosperity. They saw my flexible schedule and casual office attire and wondered when I'd get a real job. The disconnect was exhausting, but I'd learned to live with it as the price of choosing my own path. The annual Williams family reunion was something I'd been attending since childhood, a tradition that brought together aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends for a weekend of barbecue, games, and catching up. This year's event was being hosted by my cousin Michelle at her home in Phoenix, and the guest list included nearly 50 people spread across 3 generations. For me, these gatherings had become exercises in endurance, opportunities to practice explaining what I did for work to relatives who forgot between years and defending choices that I'd long since stopped questioning myself. Marcus, meanwhile, approached family reunions like networking events, opportunities to share war stories from the corporate world and collect admiration from relatives impressed by his professional advancement. He'd recently been assigned to a project with a major retail chain, work that he described in terms that made it sound like he was personally responsible for revolutionizing American shopping habits. Our parents glowed with pride as he held court with the older generation, explaining market dynamics and business trends with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. I arrived at Michelle's house on a Saturday afternoon in late September, the Arizona heat finally beginning to break as autumn approached. The backyard was filled with familiar faces, the next generation of Williams cousins now bringing their own children to continue traditions that stretched back to my grandparents' generation. It should have been a comfortable environment, surrounded by people who'd known me since childhood, but I felt the familiar tension that came with preparing to explain and defend my life choices to well-meaning relatives. Marcus was already there when I arrived, dressed in khakis and a button-down shirt that managed to look both casual and professional. He was deep in conversation with our Uncle Robert, a retired insurance executive who'd always taken a particular interest in the professional lives of his nieces and nephews. As I approached with my contribution to the potluck, a quinoa salad that would probably be politely ignored in favor of more traditional options, I caught the tail end of their conversation. The retail industry is going through massive disruption, Marcus was saying, gesturing with the kind of animated confidence he'd perfected in client presentations. Our firm is helping them navigate digital transformation challenges that could make or break their market position over the next 5 years. Uncle Robert nodded appreciatively, asking follow-up questions that allowed Marcus to elaborate on his expertise and the complexity of his work. When Uncle Robert spotted me approaching, he shifted the conversation to include me with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for long-lost relatives. "Sarah, look at you all grown up and running your own business. Marcus was just telling me about his consulting work. What exactly is it that you do again?" The question was meant kindly, but it highlighted how my work never seemed to stick in people's memories the way Marcus's corporate job did. Before I could answer, Marcus jumped in with what he probably intended as helpful explanation. "Sarah runs a little marketing company," he said with the tone of someone describing a hobby that had gotten slightly out of hand. "She helps local businesses with their advertising and social media. It's actually pretty impressive what she's built." The words were supportive on the surface, but the qualifiers, little local, actually pretty impressive, revealed the lens through which he viewed my work. I smiled tightly and offered my own description. "I run Williams Marketing Solutions. We provide comprehensive marketing strategy and brand development services to mid-market companies across the Southwest. Right now I'm working with healthcare systems, technology companies, and manufacturing firms to help them grow their market share and improve their competitive positioning." The language was more formal than I typically used, but I'd learned that family gatherings required a certain level of corporate speak to be taken seriously. Uncle Robert looked genuinely interested, but before he could ask follow-up questions, Marcus's attention was caught by someone across the yard. "Oh, there's someone I need you to meet," he said, suddenly animated in a way that suggested professional opportunity. "Jennifer and I met this guy at a conference last month. He's the CEO of some company that might be looking for consulting services. This could be huge for my career." The man Marcus was so eager to meet stood by the dessert table, engaged in conversation with my cousin Michelle about her recent kitchen renovation. He was tall with graying hair at his temples, wearing a casual polo shirt and khakis that suggested weekend comfort rather than corporate posturing. Something about his demeanor seemed familiar, but I couldn't place him immediately. Marcus practically dragged me across the yard, his excitement palpable as we approached. "David Chen," he announced to the man, extending his hand with practiced corporate enthusiasm. "We met at the Southwest Business Leaders Conference last month. I'm Marcus Williams from Morrison Strategic Consulting, and this is my sister Sarah." David shook Marcus's hand politely before turning to me with a warm smile. "Sarah Williams," he said, and there was something in his tone that suggested recognition. "It's wonderful to meet you in person." Before I could respond or process the implication of his words, Marcus jumped back into the conversation with the kind of aggressive networking energy that made me cringe. "David runs a healthcare company here in Phoenix," Marcus explained to me as if I weren't capable of introducing myself. "We were discussing how Morrison Strategic could help with some operational efficiency challenges they're facing. It's exactly the kind of transformational work our firm specializes in." The confidence in his voice suggested he'd already mentally closed the deal and started planning his success story. David nodded politely but didn't seem particularly enthusiastic about Marcus's pitch. Instead, he turned his attention back to me. "Williams Marketing Solutions," he said with what appeared to be genuine interest. "You've built quite an impressive operation. Your team's work has been exceptional." The comment hung in the air like a puzzle piece that didn't fit the picture Marcus had been painting. Marcus looked confused, glancing between David and me as if trying to solve a math problem with missing variables. "You know Sarah's little business?" he asked, his tone carrying the same dismissive quality he'd used with Uncle Robert earlier. "That's cool that you've heard of local marketing companies. The small business community here is pretty tight-knit." The word little seemed to echo in the sudden silence that followed. David's expression shifted slightly, a subtle tightening around his eyes that suggested Marcus's characterization didn't align with his understanding. "Little business," he repeated, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm not sure I'd describe Williams Marketing Solutions that way." I felt heat rising in my cheeks, partly from embarrassment at Marcus's casual dismissal, and partly from the growing suspicion that this conversation was about to take an unexpected turn. "David, have we worked together?" I asked, though something in my memory was beginning to connect dots I hadn't previously noticed. "We have indeed," he replied, his smile becoming more genuine. "Though our interactions have been primarily through your project managers. I'm David Chen, CEO of Phoenix Regional Medical Center." The words hit like a physical impact, and I felt my world shift slightly on its axis. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions, starting with confusion, moving through realization, and settling somewhere between shock and horror. Phoenix Regional Medical Center was one of the largest healthcare systems in the state, with annual revenues that dwarfed most of the corporations Morrison Strategic consulted for. More importantly for Marcus's immediate situation, it was the client success story I'd been proudly sharing with family for the past year, though apparently no one had been listening closely enough to remember the details. "You're Sarah's client," Marcus said slowly, as if testing the words to see if they made sense in his mouth. The networking confidence had evaporated, replaced by the kind of awkward uncertainty that comes when carefully constructed narratives suddenly collapse. David nodded, his expression now carrying a hint of amusement at Marcus's obvious discomfort. "For almost 2 years now, your sister and her team have been instrumental in our brand repositioning and community engagement initiatives. The results have exceeded every benchmark we established." He turned to me with what looked like professional respect. "The reputation management work after our crisis last year was particularly impressive. I've been recommending Williams Marketing Solutions to colleagues across the industry." The crisis he was referring to had been one of the most challenging projects of my career. Phoenix Regional had faced a perfect storm of negative publicity when a patient safety incident coincided with a nurse's strike and a critical audit report. The media coverage had been devastating, community trust had plummeted, and patient volumes had dropped by nearly 30% over 6 months. When they hired my team, their board was actively discussing whether the organization could survive the reputational damage. The turnaround had required everything I'd learned about crisis communications, stakeholder engagement, and systematic brand rebuilding. We'd developed a comprehensive strategy that addressed immediate reputation repair while implementing long-term changes to prevent similar issues. The work had involved community forums, employee engagement initiatives, transparent communication protocols, and a complete overhaul of their public-facing messaging. 18 months later, Phoenix Regional's reputation scores were higher than they'd been before the crisis, and they'd not only recovered their lost patient volume but expanded their market share. Marcus was staring at me as if seeing a stranger, his carefully constructed understanding of our professional hierarchy crumbling in real time. "You never told me Phoenix Regional was your client," he said, accusation and confusion warring in his voice. "I've mentioned them dozens of times," I replied, trying to keep my tone level despite the vindication surging through my system. "Last Christmas, I talked about the reputation management project. At Mom's birthday dinner, I discussed the community engagement campaigns. 2 months ago at Sunday brunch, I shared the news about their market share growth. Each example was a small wound, a moment when my professional achievements had been dismissed or forgotten in favor of more pressing family concerns." David was watching this exchange with the kind of fascination typically reserved for nature documentaries, clearly recognizing that he'd wandered into a family dynamic he hadn't anticipated. "I hope you're proud of your sister," he said to Marcus, his tone diplomatic but pointed. "The healthcare industry is notoriously difficult to navigate, especially during crisis situations. What your sister accomplished with our organization is the kind of work that makes careers." Before Marcus could respond, other family members began gravitating toward our conversation, drawn by the obvious tension and the presence of an unfamiliar face who seemed to command respect. My mother appeared first, her social radar finely tuned to detect important conversations at family gatherings. "Who's your friend Marcus?" she asked, with the bright smile she reserved for people she suspected might be professionally significant. The assumption that David must be Marcus's connection rather than mine was automatic, so ingrained in our family's worldview that she didn't even consider alternatives. "Actually, Mrs. Williams," David said with gentle correction, "I'm here as Sarah's client. I was hoping to catch up with her about some upcoming projects." The clarification seemed to physically stagger my mother, who looked between David and me as if trying to solve a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit her understanding of reality. "Sarah's client," she repeated, her voice carrying the same disbelief Marcus had displayed moments earlier. "But you seem so," she trailed off, apparently unable to finish a sentence that would have revealed her assumptions about the caliber of clients my little business could attract. My father had joined the growing circle, along with Uncle Robert and several cousins who sensed something significant was happening. The family gathering was transforming into an impromptu business meeting, with me at the center in a way that felt both vindicating and surreal. "David is the CEO of Phoenix Regional Medical Center," I explained to the assembled group, watching faces change as people recalibrated their understanding of what I did for work. "My team has been working with them on strategic marketing initiatives for the past 2 years." The words felt different coming out of my mouth now, backed by David's presence and obvious respect. Uncle Robert, who'd been asking about my work 20 minutes earlier, now looked at me with something approaching awe. "Phoenix Regional is huge," he said, his voice carrying newfound respect. "That's not small business marketing. That's major corporate consulting." The shift in his tone was dramatic enough to be almost comical, if it hadn't been so revealing about how quickly perceptions could change when presented with different context. Marcus had remained unusually quiet during these revelations, his face cycling through emotions I couldn't quite read. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost the confident networking energy he'd displayed earlier. "I had no idea your work was so." He paused, searching for words that wouldn't diminish him while acknowledging me. "I mean, I knew you were doing well, but I didn't realize the scale." The comment revealed everything about how our family had framed our respective careers. Marcus's corporate consulting work was automatically assumed to be significant, because it happened within a recognizable structure with impressive titles and familiar metrics. My entrepreneurial success was invisible because it didn't fit traditional frameworks for measuring professional achievement. The size and complexity of my projects, the caliber of my clients, the strategic impact of my work had all been filtered through assumptions about what small business meant. David seemed to recognize the delicate family dynamics playing out around him, and stepped in with the kind of diplomatic skill that probably served him well in hospital board meetings. Both of you seem to have chosen very different but successful paths, he said, including Marcus in his comment, despite the awkwardness of the situation. The consulting industry serves an important role in helping organizations navigate complex challenges. It was a gracious attempt to smooth over the tension, but the damage to Marcus's carefully constructed narrative was already done. For years he'd been the family's success story, the one whose career trajectory made sense to relatives who measured achievement in corporate terms. Now surrounded by family members who were realizing that his little business sister was consulting for organizations they actually recognized, the professional hierarchy he'd assumed was being quietly but definitively reversed. My cousin Jennifer, who'd been listening from the edge of the group, stepped forward with a question that cut to the heart of the matter. Sarah, what other clients do you work with? I mean, if Phoenix Regional is just one of them. She trailed off, but the implication was clear. If I was working with healthcare systems that everyone recognized, what other significant projects was I handling that the family had dismissed or ignored? The question opened floodgates I'd been keeping closed for years, not out of secrecy, but because previous attempts to share my professional achievements had been met with polite disinterest. Right now I'm working with TechSouth Industries on their market expansion strategy, Desert Manufacturing on their brand repositioning, and I just signed a contract with Southwest Education Partners to help them develop their digital transformation approach. I said, naming clients whose combined revenues exceeded most Fortune 500 companies. Each name landed with visible impact on my assembled family members, who were clearly recognizing organizations they knew from local news, business journals, or personal experience. TechSouth Industries had been featured prominently in economic development discussions about bringing technology companies to Arizona. Desert Manufacturing was one of the state's largest employers, with facilities across 3 cities. Southwest Education Partners managed educational contracts for several school districts, making them a name familiar to anyone with children in the local public school system. Marcus was now staring at the ground, the networking enthusiasm completely drained from his posture. The man who'd been confidently discussing his own corporate achievements 20 minutes earlier seemed to be shrinking with each client name I mentioned. "Why didn't you tell us about any of this?" he asked, his voice carrying what might have been hurt underneath the obvious embarrassment. The question sparked something in me that had been building for years, a frustration that went beyond this single conversation to encompass every family gathering where my achievements had been overlooked or minimized. "I've been telling you," I said, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to stay calm. "I've been sharing this information at every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every phone call home. The problem isn't that I haven't been talking about my work. The problem is that no one has been listening." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a backyard grill, impossible to ignore and uncomfortable for everyone to breathe. My mother looked stricken, clearly running through memories of recent conversations and recognizing the truth in my statement. My father was nodding slowly, the kind of acknowledgement that comes when someone realizes they've been making assumptions without questioning them. David had become an inadvertent witness to years of family dysfunction playing out in real time, and I could see him calculating whether he should excuse himself from what was clearly becoming a very personal conversation. But before he could make his escape, Marcus delivered the comment that would define this family reunion for everyone present. "Okay, so you have some impressive clients," he said, his voice tight with what sounded like a mixture of defensiveness and embarrassment. "But it's still just marketing consulting. It's not like you're doing the kind of strategic transformation work that actually shapes how organizations operate. What you do is important, but it's more like support services." He paused, glancing around the circle of family members as if looking for validation. "I mean, let's be honest. Marketing is kind of embarrassing compared to real business consulting." The word embarrassing seemed to echo across the backyard, creating a silence so complete, I could hear the hum of Michelle's pool filter and the distant sound of children playing in the front yard. Every person in our circle was staring at Marcus with expressions ranging from shock to second-hand embarrassment, recognizing that he'd just insulted his sister's profession in front of her most important client. David's expression hardened, the diplomatic politeness replaced by something much colder. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of authority that comes from running organizations where words have consequences and public statements reflect on institutional credibility. "Embarrassing," he repeated, his tone carefully controlled but clearly offended. "Mr. Williams, I'm not sure you understand what your sister does or the impact of her work. He turned slightly to address me directly, but his words were meant for the entire group. The strategic marketing work Williams Marketing Solutions provided to Phoenix Regional didn't just support our operations, it literally saved our organization. He paused to let that sink in before continuing, his voice gaining intensity as he spoke. When we hired Sarah's team, we were facing potential bankruptcy due to reputation damage that was driving away patients, donors, and quality medical staff. Traditional business consulting had failed to address the root causes of our crisis because they didn't understand the complex relationship between community trust, brand perception, and operational sustainability in healthcare. Marcus was now visibly uncomfortable, but David wasn't finished. Your sister developed a comprehensive strategy that integrated crisis communications, stakeholder engagement, internal culture change, and long-term brand positioning. The work required understanding healthcare regulations, community dynamics, media relations, digital marketing, employee psychology, and competitive analysis. If that's embarrassing, then I'm not sure what you'd consider impressive. The demolition of Marcus's dismissive comment was thorough and public, delivered with the kind of professional authority that left no room for argument. But David continued, apparently feeling that the insult to my work required a more complete response. The results speak for themselves, he said, his voice now carrying the tone he probably used in board presentations. Patient satisfaction scores increased by 40%. Community trust metrics reached their highest levels in organizational history. Employee retention improved dramatically, saving us millions in recruitment and training costs. We secured the largest donation in hospital history specifically because donors regained confidence in our mission and management. He turned to look directly at Marcus, his expression stern. That's not support services, Mr. Williams. That's strategic business transformation that directly impacted our bottom line, our operational effectiveness, and our competitive position. The fact that it was accomplished through marketing strategy rather than traditional consulting makes it more impressive, not less. The silence that followed David's response was profound and uncomfortable, the kind of quiet that occurs when someone has been so thoroughly corrected that any response would only make things worse. Marcus was staring at his shoes, his face flushed with what looked like a combination of embarrassment and anger. My parents were exchanging glances that suggested rapid recalculation of long-held assumptions.
Uncle Robert was the first to break the silence, his voice careful and diplomatic. It sounds like Sarah has built something really extraordinary, he said, addressing his comment to the group but looking at me with what appeared to be genuine admiration. I had no idea the scope of what you were doing. My cousin Michelle, perhaps recognizing that her reunion was becoming an uncomfortable family intervention, tried to redirect the conversation toward safer territory. Why don't we grab some dessert and maybe hear more about everyone's work over pie, she suggested with forced brightness. But the damage was done, and the comfortable family dynamic that had existed an hour earlier was now irretrievably altered. As people began to disperse from our circle, some heading toward the dessert table and others finding excuses to check on children or refresh drinks, David approached me with an apologetic expression. I'm sorry if I made things awkward with your family, he said quietly. I probably overreacted to your brother's comment, but I couldn't let him dismiss the quality of your work like that. You didn't make anything awkward, I assured him, still processing the surreal experience of having my professional reputation defended so thoroughly by a client I'd primarily known through email and project meetings. Thank you for setting the record straight. I've been trying to do that for years. Marcus was still standing nearby, clearly uncertain whether he should approach us or retreat entirely. David noticed his hesitation and, in what I recognized as an act of professional grace, extended an olive branch. Marcus, I apologize if my response was harsh. I'm sure your consulting work is excellent. I just have strong feelings about the value of strategic marketing because I've seen firsthand how transformative it can be when done well. It was a diplomatic gesture designed to preserve Marcus's dignity while maintaining the truth about my professional achievements. But Marcus, perhaps still stinging from the public correction, wasn't ready to accept the peace offering gracefully. I understand you're impressed with Sarah's work, he said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. But you have to admit that what she does is more specialized than what traditional business consultants handle.
We work across multiple industries and functional areas, dealing with complex organizational challenges that require broad strategic thinking. Even after everything that had just happened, Marcus was still trying to position his work as more significant than mine, unable to accept that his assumptions about our professional hierarchy might be fundamentally flawed. David's expression suggested he was beginning to lose patience with Marcus's persistence in missing the point. "Marcus," he said with the kind of firmness typically reserved for correcting subordinates who aren't getting important messages. "I've worked with strategic consultants from several major firms over my 15 years in healthcare leadership. They're good at what they do, but they typically recommend solutions that other organizations have already implemented. What your sister does is different. She creates customized strategies that address unique challenges in ways that produce measurable, sustainable results." The comparison was devastating in its simplicity and accuracy. Traditional business consulting, the kind Marcus specialized in, often involved applying proven methodologies across similar organizational challenges. Strategic marketing consulting, especially at the level I was working, required developing original solutions for complex problems that didn't have established best practices. Marcus finally seemed to grasp that he was only making things worse for himself, and he excused himself from our conversation with mumbled words about checking on Jennifer and finding something to drink. As he walked away, David shook his head with what looked like a mixture of frustration and sympathy. "Family dynamics are complicated," he said, his tone gentler now that Marcus was out of earshot. "But you should be proud of what you've built, Sarah. What you've accomplished is remarkable, and it's unfortunate that the people closest to you haven't been able to see it clearly." The validation from someone whose opinion carried genuine professional weight felt better than I'd expected, but it also highlighted how much energy I'd been spending over the years trying to earn recognition that should have come naturally from people who claim to love and support me. The reunion was continuing around us, but the comfortable family gathering I'd arrived to had been permanently altered by 20 minutes of conversation that had exposed years of misperception and dismissal. The drive home from the reunion felt like traveling through a different dimension, where the same roads and familiar landmarks existed but everything had fundamentally shifted. I kept replaying David's defense of my work, the shocked expressions on my family's faces, and Marcus's humiliated retreat to the far side of the backyard, where he'd spent the remainder of the afternoon, avoiding eye contact with everyone who'd witnessed his public correction. My phone had been buzzing with text messages since I'd left Michelle's house, but I waited until I was safely in my apartment before checking them. The first was from my cousin Jennifer, who'd approached me quietly before I left to say she'd had no idea about the scope of my business. "I feel terrible that we've all been so clueless about what you've accomplished," her text read. "Can we grab coffee this week? I'd love to hear more about your work and maybe pick your brain about some marketing challenges at my company." My mother had texted twice, first with a brief "we need to talk," followed 20 minutes later by a longer message that began, "I've been thinking about today," and continued with what appeared to be the beginning of a genuine apology. My father's message was characteristically direct. "Proud of you, sweetheart. Always have been, but today I realized I haven't done a good enough job showing it." Marcus hadn't texted at all, which wasn't surprising given how the afternoon had ended. After David's pointed correction, my brother had spent the rest of the reunion in damage control mode, trying to salvage his professional reputation with family members who were now questioning everything they thought they knew about our respective careers. I'd watched from across the yard as he'd attempted to restart conversations with uncles and cousins, but the confident networking energy was gone, replaced by an awkward defensiveness that only made things worse. The most unexpected message came from David Chen himself, sent from what appeared to be his personal phone rather than his work email. "Sarah, I hope my intervention today didn't create more family drama than it resolved. Your brother seems like a good person who may have just been caught off guard by information he didn't have. If you're willing, I'd like to discuss expanding our partnership to include some projects I've been considering. You've more than earned the opportunity." I set my phone aside and walked to the window of my downtown apartment, looking out at the Phoenix skyline as the sun set behind the mountains. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was living in a space I'd chosen and furnished entirely through my own professional success, in a city where my business was respected and growing, while my family was just now discovering that I'd built something significant. The emotional whiplash of the day was exhausting. Part of me felt vindicated, finally having my professional achievements recognized by the people whose opinions had always mattered most to me. But another part felt sad about all the years of dismissal and misunderstanding, all the family gatherings where my successes had been minimized or ignored, while Marcus's corporate achievements were celebrated. Monday morning brought a new perspective along with my usual coffee and client emails. Jessica, my first employee and now creative director, was waiting in the office when I arrived, her expression curious and slightly amused. "So how was the family reunion?" she asked with the tone of someone who'd heard enough stories about William's family dynamics to expect drama. I gave her a brief recap of David Chen's unexpected appearance and Marcus's public humiliation, watching her expressions shift from surprise to satisfaction to something approaching concern. "That's incredible validation for you," she said when I finished. "But how are you feeling about the family stuff?" "That sounds pretty intense." The question forced me to examine emotions I'd been avoiding since driving home the night before. "I think I'm relieved more than anything," I said, slowly testing the words as I spoke them. "I've spent so many years feeling like I was invisible or irrelevant at family gatherings. Having someone like David publicly recognize the value of our work felt like proof that I wasn't imagining the dismissive treatment." Jessica nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. "What happens now, though? With Marcus, I mean, and your parents, are things going to be weird forever, or do you think this might actually improve your relationships?" It was a question I'd been avoiding, but one that would define how I moved forward with my family. The answer came sooner than expected when my mother called that afternoon, her voice carrying a vulnerability I rarely heard from her. "Sarah, can you come to dinner tomorrow night? Just you, not Marcus. Your father and I have been talking, and we realize we owe you a conversation that's long overdue." I arrived at my parents' house the next evening with a mixture of anticipation and weariness, unsure whether I was walking into another uncomfortable confrontation or a genuine attempt at understanding. My mother opened the door with an expression that looked suspiciously like nervousness, and my father was waiting in the living room with the kind of serious demeanor usually reserved for discussions about health problems or financial crises. "Sit down, sweetheart," my mother said, gesturing toward the couch where I'd spent countless evenings as a child. "We want to apologize." The words were simple, but coming from a woman who rarely admitted mistakes, they carried considerable weight. My father leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped together in a gesture I recognized from childhood conversations about important topics. "We've been thinking about yesterday, about all the things you said about telling us about your work and us not listening. You were right, and we're sorry." What followed was the most honest conversation I'd had with my parents in years, maybe ever. They acknowledged that they'd fallen into patterns of thinking about Marcus and me that had more to do with their own preconceptions than with our actual achievements. My mother admitted that she'd been more comfortable celebrating Marcus's corporate success because it fit into categories she understood, while my entrepreneurial path had seemed risky and uncertain. "We were proud of you," she insisted, her voice emotional. "We just didn't know how to show it properly. When you started your business, all we could see was the risk and the uncertainty. We didn't understand that what felt scary to us was actually you building something incredible." My father added his own perspective, explaining that his generation had been taught to measure success through traditional employment markers like job titles, company benefits, and predictable career progression. "I kept waiting for you to get a real job because I didn't understand that you'd already created something better than most corporate positions could offer," he said with what sounded like genuine regret. The conversation lasted 3 hours, covering years of misunderstandings and missed opportunities for connection. They asked detailed questions about my business, my clients, and my future plans, displaying the kind of engaged interest that I'd been craving for years. When I mentioned my team size and revenue projections, my mother's eyes widened with what looked like a mixture of pride and amazement. "You employ 8 people?" she asked, as if hearing the information for the first time despite my having mentioned it at multiple family gatherings. "That's not a small business, Sarah. That's a real company with real employees depending on you." The realization seemed to hit her with visible force, and I could see her mentally recalibrating her understanding of what I'd built. Marcus's name came up inevitably, and the conversation grew more complex as we discussed his reaction to Sunday's revelations.
My parents were clearly struggling with how to address his behavior without seeming to take sides in a sibling conflict they'd inadvertently helped create. Marcus called us yesterday night, my father said carefully. He was pretty upset about how things went at the reunion. He feels like he was ambushed and embarrassed in front of the family. The comment suggested that Marcus's version of events focused more on his own humiliation than on the years of dismissive treatment that had led to the confrontation. He also said some things about your client that weren't entirely fair, my mother added with diplomatic understatement.
We told him that his reaction was inappropriate and that he owes you an apology. The fact that they'd taken my side in the conflict, something that would have seemed impossible just days earlier, felt like a significant shift in family dynamics. The conversation concluded with plans for future dinners where we could continue rebuilding our understanding of each other, and with my parents expressing genuine interest in visiting my office and meeting my team. As I drove home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the sense that my family actually saw me clearly and valued what I'd accomplished. Marcus's apology came 2 days later in the form of a phone call that began awkwardly and gradually became more genuine as he worked through his own complicated emotions about Sunday's events. I've been thinking about what happened at the reunion, he said after initial pleasantries that felt strained on both sides. I was out of line calling your work embarrassing. That was unfair and untrue. The apology continued with Marcus acknowledging that he'd been operating under assumptions about our respective careers that weren't based on actual information about what I did or who I worked with. I think I got comfortable thinking of myself as the business expert in the family, he admitted. It was easier than actually paying attention to what you were accomplishing. What surprised me most was his willingness to examine his own professional insecurities, something the Marcus I'd grown up with would never have done. Meeting your client like that, hearing him talk about the impact of your work, it made me realize that maybe I've been defining success too narrowly, he said. What you've built is actually more impressive than what I do, and I think I've been threatened by that without wanting to admit it. The conversation wasn't a complete resolution of our complicated sibling dynamics, but it felt like the beginning of a more honest relationship based on mutual respect rather than competition for parental approval. Marcus expressed genuine interest in learning more about my business and even asked whether there might be opportunities for our companies to collaborate on projects that required both strategic consulting and marketing expertise. 3 months after the reunion, my relationship with my family had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. My parents regularly asked about my work with the kind of detailed interest they'd previously reserved for Marcus's corporate adventures. They'd visited my office, met my team, and even referred a potential client to me through their personal network. Most importantly, they'd stopped treating my entrepreneurial success as a phase I'd eventually outgrow in favor of more traditional employment. Marcus and I had begun meeting monthly for coffee, conversations that covered both personal and professional topics with a depth that had been missing from our relationship for years. He'd started his own consulting practice, inspired partly by my entrepreneurial example and partly by his desire to have more control over his professional trajectory. The competitive dynamic that had defined our relationship since childhood was gradually being replaced by something that felt more like genuine partnership. The business benefits of that family reunion went beyond emotional resolution. David Chen had indeed expanded our partnership, bringing me into strategic discussions about Phoenix Regional's long-term growth plans and introducing me to other healthcare leaders who became significant clients. The referrals from that single conversation had added nearly 30% to my annual revenue and positioned my company for expansion into new markets. But the most significant change was internal, a shift in how I thought about success and validation. For years I'd been seeking recognition from people who weren't equipped to understand or appreciate what I was building. The reunion had forced me to realize that my professional worth wasn't dependent on family approval, and that the validation I'd been craving was available from clients, colleagues, and industry peers who actually understood the value of my work. Standing in my expanded office space 6 months later, watching my team collaborate on strategies for clients across multiple industries, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that awkward afternoon in Michelle's backyard. The family relationships were healthier, my business was thriving, and most importantly, I'd stopped apologizing for my own success or minimizing my achievements to make others comfortable. Marcus had been right about one thing during his corporate consulting days: transformation is possible when organizations are willing to confront uncomfortable truths about their existing systems and commit to sustainable change. He just hadn't realized that our family was the organization most in need of strategic transformation, and that sometimes the most powerful consulting happens when someone finally refuses to accept the status quo. 2 years later, I stood at the podium of the Phoenix Convention Center, looking out at an audience of over 300 business leaders attending the Southwest Marketing Excellence Awards. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was delivering the keynote address to an audience that included several competitors from Morrison Strategic Consulting, the same firm where Marcus had once worked before starting his own practice. The invitation to speak had come after Williams Marketing Solutions was named Agency of the Year, recognition based on our innovative work across healthcare, technology, and manufacturing sectors. The award itself sat on a table beside the podium, a crystal sculpture that represented validation from an industry that had initially viewed my small firm with skepticism. My speech focused on the theme of unconventional paths to success, drawing from my own experience building a consulting practice that challenged traditional assumptions about how marketing strategy should be developed and implemented. As I looked out at the audience, I spotted familiar faces from various stages of my professional journey, including several clients who had taken risks on an entrepreneur when they could have chosen established firms with prestigious reputations. David Chen sat in the third row, his presence both supportive and symbolically significant. Phoenix Regional Medical Center had become not just a client but a case study in how strategic marketing could transform organizational outcomes. Their continued growth and industry leadership had generated referrals that expanded my practice beyond Arizona into Colorado, New Mexico, and Nevada markets. The speech concluded with thoughts about the importance of authentic professional relationships and the dangers of measuring success through other people's definitions of achievement. As applause filled the convention center, I felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with external validation and everything to do with the knowledge that I'd built something meaningful on my own terms. The networking reception that followed provided opportunities to connect with potential collaborators, including several executives who were dealing with complex brand challenges that required customized strategic approaches. These conversations reminded me how much the industry had evolved since I'd started my practice, with increasing recognition that effective marketing required deep understanding of organizational culture, stakeholder dynamics, and industry-specific constraints. Marcus appeared during the reception, approaching with a smile that looked genuinely proud rather than competitive. His own consulting practice had grown steadily, focusing on operational efficiency projects that complemented rather than competed with my marketing specialization. We'd actually collaborated on 2 joint proposals in recent months, combining our expertise to offer clients comprehensive strategic solutions. Impressive speech, he said, offering congratulations that felt authentic. The Agency of the Year award is huge. Mom and Dad are going to be insufferably proud at Sunday dinner. His reference to our weekly family meals highlighted how dramatically our relationships had changed since that awkward reunion years earlier. Those Sunday dinners had become genuine celebrations of each other's achievements rather than competitions for parental attention. My parents now understood enough about both our businesses to ask informed questions and offer relevant support. More importantly, they'd learned to celebrate our successes without comparing them or ranking their significance. The conversation with Marcus was interrupted by Jennifer Rodriguez, the CEO of Southwest Education Partners, who'd been instrumental in expanding my practice into new markets. "Sarah, I wanted to introduce you to someone who's been asking about your work," she said, gesturing toward a woman I recognized from industry publications as the chief marketing officer of a Fortune 500 technology company. What followed was a conversation about potential consulting opportunities that could represent the next phase of growth for Williams Marketing Solutions. The technology sector presented challenges that would require everything I'd learned about crisis communications, brand positioning, and stakeholder engagement, but applied to companies with national reach and complex regulatory environments. As the evening progressed, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had led to this recognition. The family reunion confrontation that had initially felt devastating had actually been the catalyst for changes that improved every aspect of my personal and professional life. Being forced to defend my work publicly had clarified my own understanding of its value and impact. The drive home from the convention center took me past the building where I'd first rented office space, a modest suite that had felt enormous when I'd signed the lease with trembling hands and an uncertain future. Williams Marketing Solutions now occupied an entire floor of a downtown high-rise, with conference rooms that hosted strategy sessions for clients from across the Southwest. My apartment had been replaced by a house in the Biltmore area, chosen not for status but for the home office space that allowed me to work effectively while maintaining better work-life balance. The furnishings reflected my own taste rather than budget constraints, and the walls displayed awards and client testimonials that told the story of a business built through consistent excellence rather than family connections or corporate politics. The recognition at tonight's ceremony represented professional validation, but the more meaningful transformation had been internal. I no longer needed external approval to confirm my worth, having learned to measure success through impact on clients, growth of my team, and contribution to my industry. The insecurity that had driven me to seek family recognition for years had been replaced by confidence rooted in demonstrated competence. Marcus called the next morning, his voice excited as he shared news that his own practice had been selected for a significant project with a manufacturing company looking to improve operational efficiency across multiple facilities. The contract would require him to expand his team and establish processes for managing complex multi-site engagements. "I was thinking we might want to coordinate our approaches," he said, referring to the fact that Williams Marketing Solutions was also being considered for the same client's brand repositioning project. "If we both land these contracts, we could offer them integrated strategic support that addresses both operational and marketing challenges simultaneously." The collaboration he proposed represented something that would have been impossible during our competitive sibling phase. Now, instead of viewing each other as rivals for family approval or professional recognition, we'd learned to see opportunities for mutual benefit and shared success. Our parents arrived for Sunday dinner that week, carrying newspapers and printed articles about the awards ceremony, their pride evident in the way they'd carefully preserved every mention of Williams Marketing Solutions in local business coverage. The conversation over dinner focused on future opportunities, potential challenges, and strategic decisions about company growth. "Have you given any thought to expanding outside the Southwest?" my father asked, his question reflecting genuine curiosity about business strategy rather than polite family interest. "The recognition you received suggests there might be national opportunities worth exploring." The question led to a discussion about the complexities of geographic expansion, the challenges of maintaining service quality across distant markets, and the importance of building local partnerships in new regions. My parents asked informed questions and offered insights based on their own professional experiences, treating me as a peer whose expertise they respected. Marcus contributed observations about his own expansion challenges, and we spent time discussing how our respective practices might support each other's growth in new markets. The collaborative tone of the conversation would have been impossible just a few years earlier, when family dinners had been exercises in competitive positioning rather than genuine professional consultation. As the evening concluded, my mother pulled me aside for a private conversation that she'd clearly been planning. "I've been thinking about how we handled things when you were starting your business," she said, her voice carrying the kind of emotional weight that suggested important personal revelations. "We were scared for you because we didn't understand what you were building," she continued. "It was easier to celebrate Marcus's corporate job because it looked like success we recognized. But you were doing something much more difficult and ultimately more impressive. I want you to know that we see that now, and we're sorry it took us so long." The apology represented the completion of a transformation that had begun with David Chen's defense of my work at the family reunion. My parents had moved from polite tolerance of my entrepreneurial choices to genuine understanding and appreciation of what I'd accomplished. More importantly, they'd learned to express their pride in ways that felt authentic rather than obligatory. The conversation concluded with my mother asking whether I'd be willing to speak to her women's club about entrepreneurship and small business development. The request represented a role reversal that would have seemed impossible when she'd been suggesting I find more stable employment. Driving home that night, I thought about the unexpected ways that professional vindication had improved my personal relationships. The family reunion confrontation that had initially seemed so painful had actually been necessary for breaking through years of misunderstanding and miscommunication. Sometimes the most important conversations happen when comfortable assumptions are challenged by unavoidable truths.
The success of Williams Marketing Solutions had provided external validation, but the deeper satisfaction came from knowing that I'd remained authentic to my own vision despite pressure to conform to other people's definitions of professional achievement. The recognition from industry peers felt meaningful because it was based on actual performance rather than family loyalty or social connections. 6 months later, Williams Marketing Solutions announced its first acquisition, purchasing a smaller firm that specialized in digital marketing implementation. The expansion allowed us to offer clients comprehensive strategic development and execution services under one roof, eliminating the coordination challenges that had previously required partnerships with multiple vendors. The acquisition announcement generated coverage in regional business publications and resulted in speaking invitations from professional organizations across the Southwest. Each opportunity reinforced my reputation as a strategic marketing expert who'd built something significant through innovation and excellence rather than following conventional industry patterns. Marcus attended the acquisition announcement event, his presence representing the supportive family relationship we'd developed after years of misunderstanding and competition. His own practice had grown to 12 employees and was being considered for projects with national scope, success that I celebrated without the insecurity that had once characterized our sibling dynamic. As I looked around the room filled with clients, employees, industry colleagues, and family members who genuinely understood and appreciated what Williams Marketing Solutions had become, I reflected on how completely my professional and personal life had been transformed since that awkward family reunion years earlier. The journey had taught me that authentic success requires building relationships based on mutual respect and demonstrated value rather than seeking approval from people who lack the context to appreciate your achievements. Sometimes the most important validation comes from defending your worth when it's questioned publicly, forcing everyone present to reconsider their assumptions about what constitutes genuine professional accomplishment. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.